Following World War I, the United States will enter the 1920s. I very cleverly called it the 1920s because it actually has a lot of names: the Roaring Twenties, the Prosperity Decade, and it is one of the most fascinating decades in U.S. history because so much was going on that we are going to be dealing with it topically. First, we'll look at the post-war adjustment. Right after World War I, the United States will go through a couple of years, especially 1919 and 1920, that are pretty difficult. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but fundamentally it's because the United States had never built up a military that big and then taken it down so quickly. It is just a post-war readjustment. And the government did a terrible job at preparing the economy and adjusting the economy. So it will lead to a lot of unrest. Then we will talk about the economics of the 1920s. It is often called the Prosperity Decade because it was a decade where people talked about a new era of the economy in which the economy will never go down again. I know it sounds insane because obviously it ends with the worst economic collapse in human history to this point. But there were all sorts of new technological inventions and the economy was doing incredibly well. And so people really talked about it like it would be a never-ending party. Which is also why it led to one of the most interesting cultural decades that we've ever had in U.S. history. Don't talk about culture a whole lot in this class, but the Roaring Twenties are just absolutely fascinating because there are all these factors coming together all at once. And they created a perfect storm. And that perfect storm will lead to just one of the most unusual decades. And cultural changes that are so big and so massive that it will lead to a huge backlash against them. And especially when we get to that Roaring Twenties and the backlash against them, you will see a lot of similarities to the period we are living through now. Then we will look at how this all got into business. During the 1920s, the United States turned to what's called welfare capitalism. It's when Americans gave business complete control. The idea was, if we give business control, then business will look out for the welfare of everyone. So don't look to the government, don't look to the labor unions, look to business, and business will make everyone's life better. Business will look out for the welfare of the population. So the government wasn't just stepping back and letting Americans do, stepping back like in the Gilded Age, laissez-faire. During the 1920s, the government will very actively work to promote businesses' interest. So the government is working hand in hand with the business to give businesses all the power. And for a lot of the 1920s, it seemed to be working for at least 7 years. Probably about 6 years. But obviously, it will end in the worst economic collapse in human history. And the thing you need to really think about for this lecture and the next 2 lectures, because you will have to write about this, is individualism as opposed to collectivism. Because what unites all of these things is the 1920s is a period of hyper or toxic individualism. Now, if you took the first half of U.S. history with me, then you know individualism is a phenomenal thing. Individualism is a great thing. It is a very American thing. The United States is, this isn't my opinion, it is one of the most individualistic countries in the world. And that's measured in all sorts of ways. I will have some links in the footnotes. But the United States is a very individualistic country, and that is one of the major reasons it has been so incredibly successful economically. Individualism leads to three fundamental things that have helped the United States be very prosperous. When you apply individualism to a political system, you get a political system where everyone thinks they're important, so you get a democratic system. In our case, a representative democracy. There are different kinds of democracy, so we'll just say a democratic system. Democracy has its flaws, but it is the best political system that we have found. When you apply individualism to an economic system, you get capitalism. Capitalism also has its flaws, but it is still the best economic system that we have yet to find. And then when you apply individualism to social sphere, or especially religion, what you get is religious freedom. The right for every individual to practice their religion or have no religion. Those three things in the modern era of human history, so at least 1500 to the present, are associated with long-term success. Other forms of government, socialist, communist, fascist, dictatorships, they all have periods where they do well, but then they usually decline very quick also. So individualism is a good thing. But like everything else, when it goes too far, then it becomes dangerous. By 1920, by the end of World War I, Americans were just sick of crusades. The Progressive Era had been a crusade to solve first all of the problems internally, solve all of the problems from industrialization and urbanization. And then with World War I, it was progressivism externally, trying to make the world safe for democracy. So during the 1920s, Americans will turn inward. And they will turn inward, and instead of trying to save the world, instead of trying to solve all the problems, they only care about me. It's a very me-centric decade. All of these things we're talking about, economic, just unfettered capitalism, where all anyone cares about is earning money, and no matter how you earn money, that's fine. Roaring 20s, conservative backlash, all of it is will come back to hyper-individualism or toxic individualism. It is the belief that everyone's belief that they can completely disregard everyone else. The reason this concept is so important to understand is it's not like the United States has always been very individualistic, but the level of individualism versus collectivism changes over time. And when we've gone through periods of hyper or toxic individualism, it usually ends with catastrophe. We get it before the Great Depression and World War II. We got it before the Civil War. We even got it before the American Revolution. And we are living through another period of it right now. You can tell when you talk to a lot of people, you hear people regularly talk about the entire United States as if they have a monopoly on what's right for everyone, and each individual, especially when you get them talking about taxes, that everyone believes that they have a monopoly on what is correct and what is right. And there's 330 million people in this country. No one has a monopoly. No one knows exactly what's right for absolutely everyone. So that is what will define this decade. Woodrow Wilson, he actually articulated it pretty well. It is only once in a generation that a people can be lifted above material things. That is why conservative government is in the saddle 2/3 of the time. And these things go in ebbs and flows. And we had gone through a period of more collectivism, looking out for other people. So the 1920s is a huge pushback against that, and just a pendulum swing to the opposite side. So keep that in mind, because individualism versus collectivism, they both have positive and negatives, but that is the theme that we will be coming back to between this lecture, the Great Depression, the New Deal, and World War II.